Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 17th season of CityWide. All year, we're talking about the big issues impacting the lives of New Yorkers. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Commissioner David Yassky, Chair of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I can't remember taxis in the news so much, maybe going back 20, 30 years. What's going on?
Well, you're right. There's a lot to do, and I think we've had a pretty aggressive agenda over the last few years. It's funny to hear somebody say that, though, because I think I look around, I see taxis everywhere. I mean, anytime you see a TV show or a movie set in New York, it's got a yellow taxi, and it's kind of the symbol of the city.
It really is iconic, because I've had visitors from Europe say to me, "I can't believe there really are yellow taxis in New York."
And they go home with a tree ornament or a refrigerator magnet, looks like a taxi. But why now? Like a lot of industries, technology forces change, growth in the city forces change. I think a lot of what we've done over the last few years in the taxis is about both technology and changes in the city. As nobody knows better than you, as you see Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, economic development changing, all the residential development. Well, you need better taxi service to go with that.
Set the baseline for us. What does the yellow cab fleet mean to the transportation system of New York?
I'm so glad that you put it in that context, because people think of it as maybe a business, right? But it really is part of the transportation network. So the subways move about 8.5 million people a day. The buses move about 2.5 million people a day. Taxis and car services together, 1.2 million. So about buses 2.5. This is half as many people as a bus. Not certainly not as big a piece as subways, but a pretty indispensable part of the transportation network. And that's split again evenly between taxis and the black cars, car service, dial-a cars. They serve a specialized function. I mean, part of it is business people getting meeting to meeting. A lot of it are people going to the doctor, people at the end of a long day just too tired they want to take the extra half hour on the bus and they want to get home fast.
You talk about neighborhoods in the city developing. I was surprised to be in your old council district not long ago in McCarran Park. I came out in the evening trying to figure out how I was going to get back home, and there were yellow cabs cruising neighborhoods where you would have had to threaten to call the TLC just a few years ago to get them to go. So that's a big change, but I gather that you're not satisfied with the adequacy of street hail opportunities around the city.
Well, the basic fact, if I was going to pick one basic fact about taxis in New York City, there just aren't enough of them, period. I mean, there aren't even enough for Manhattan, much less Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx. So there are 13,000 taxis. We need a lot more than that. We're doing two things about it. First, we're trying to put more yellows on the road. We have legislation in Albany that will allow us to issue another 2,000 taxi licenses, or they call medallions, and that I think will be the right number. But beyond that, we also want to create a fleet of taxis that serve outside Manhattan. The reality is, as many more yellows as you add, they'll still want to spend most of their time in Manhattan. You said you do see them now in Williamsburg, Greenpoint, you didn't used to. but there's not going to be enough to serve that demand because the intensity of the demand in Manhattan is so much richer. So what we've done, the same legislation that it gives us the 2,000 new yellows, also allows car services, dial-a-cars, liveries, to act like taxis. They can put in a meter, put a roof light on, take credit cards, the whole thing. They'll be green instead of yellow. And that means that they serve the boroughs and northern Manhattan. That's been tied up in litigation for about a year now. The state legislature passed that law in February of 2012. We're sitting here now, May 2013. So it's been tied up in litigation for about 15 months.
By who?
By the yellow taxi fleet owners. So there are 30 large taxi fleets, and they like things the way they are. I don't blame them for that. It's a very profitable business to be in. The value of a yellow medallion, just look since 2000. 2000, a yellow taxi medallion sold for about $250,000. Today, they sell for $1.2 million.
So, wait a second. The right to run a yellow cab on the streets of New York is worth more than $1 million?
Worth $1,200,000. That doesn't include the car. That's just the right to, as you say, the right to operate a yellow taxi. So that tells you that there aren't enough of them. I mean,
so if the city sells 2,000 more, what's the city get out of that?
So part of the benefit of the new medallions, the biggest benefit is service, because that's the focus, service to the public. But the other benefit is $2 billion. That's about the value of those medallions. $2 billion for the city budget over the course of a few years. You wouldn't sell them all at once. First of all, you don't want to disrupt the market in taxi medallions. Second, you want to make sure that you see how it does affect service. So, but still, that's a lot of cops and teachers that you don't have to ask taxpayers for money for.
I think some of our viewers may be confused about a couple of things, and you can take them
much like me.
Take them one at a time. One is, well, what's the state legislature got to do with this? You're the taxi and limousine czar. Why don't you just decide how many medallions there should be? And what do you mean that you're concerned about disrupting the market? Shouldn't you just put enough taxis on the street to take care of everybody's needs?
So, sure. First of all, I appreciate the promotion to czar, and when I get some serfs, I'll come back and we'll have a full discussion. But in terms of the state legislature, for new medallions, you do need state approval for that because it's a little arcane, but the city government can't do anything that raises revenue without state permission. So that's where you need it for the new medallions. The state also approved what we're calling the borough taxis, and there you didn't need the state, but as you know, there's we're talking with one of the most skilled government lawyers in the city here. The city, and like all cities, same Buffalo, Rochester, legally is a creature of the state, and if the state feels that there's a need that they need to step in, they have that ability to do it. Now, there's all kinds of rules for when the state is supposed to do it and how they do it, and that's what the yellow taxi fleet owners have chosen to sue about. But it's worth talking about because when Mayor Bloomberg first proposed the borough service, this is an idea, by the way, that goes back to Ed Koch. Ed Koch actually goes back to Lindsay. Lindsay's, when he started the TLC, first task they were given, it was a formal kind of written assignment, mayor's order was come up with a plan to serve the boroughs. And that didn't go anywhere. Ed Koch, as mayor, proposed a separate borough taxi, he called them Green Stripe. They were supposed to have a green stripe on them. Didn't go anywhere because of the opposition of the taxi fleet owners who don't want to see competition. Anyway, fast forward 2011. Mayor Bloomberg says, I am determined to provide 5 borough service. The reality was that the taxi fleet owners are a powerful interest, and they were able to bottle it up in the city. And so the state legislature looked at that. They said, a lot of state legislators, as you know, from Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, they said, we need service in our districts. The city isn't doing it. We're going to pass it here.
Well, why didn't the city council members from those boroughs feel the same way?
Politics doesn't always work out the way it's supposed to. I think that maybe kind of at the end of the day, given more time, I'd like to believe that the council members would have gotten around to it too, but we didn't want to wait for that.
So if those medallions are worth $1 million, it means that somebody's getting a return on investment. But you open up the newspapers and you read about cab drivers 12-hour shifts, takes a toll on them, and they're taking home relatively small amounts of money. Is there something wrong with the economics of the industry?
It has become, like a lot of industries, increasingly the inequalities between the owners and the workers are much greater today than they were 20, 30 years ago. I don't think the taxi world is alone in that way, but it's absolutely true.
You tried to adjust that, right? You gave a rate increase a few years ago, but you provided that the owners got a smaller share?
That's right. We regulate both the fare that the customer pays, the passenger pays when he or she gets in the taxi, and also what the driver pays to take out the cab. The way the industry works, a lot of people don't know, why should they? The driver pays the fleet a fixed amount, $114 to take the car out for the 12-hour shift. And then the driver keeps everything that comes in. We raised the fare that the passengers pay, but we kept the amount that the drivers pay to take the car the same. Now, here's the catch. Not everybody obeys the rules in this, like everything. And I know I remember you and I talking about rent control and rent stabilization a long time ago in Mitchell-Lama. And, you need a government to be ever vigilant if those rules are going to be in practice what they are on the paper. Same in the taxi world. And we did, candidly, the TLC hadn't done enough over the years to police that rule and protect drivers. We just created what we call lease enforcement unit to make sure that the drivers aren't being cheated. First time we've had that. Over the last year, we've collected about $120,000 in fines from fleets that were cheating drivers, and even more important to me, gotten $40,000 in restitution to drivers who were overcharged. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. You're going to see a lot more of those.
The jokes about not finding a American-born taxi driver have tapered off, not because I think that the demographics of drivers has changed. They seem to still be overwhelmingly immigrants or second generation, but so have the jokes about immigrant drivers who don't know their way around the city or don't speak English or are maniacs behind the wheel. Am I right? Has the quality of taxi drivers gone up in the last few years?
I believe that the quality of the service has gone up. It's hard to measure, but judged in part by the feedback we get from passengers.
Complaints? Are complaints down?
And in part by the effort that we've put into it. We've focused on customer service. Before every taxi driver hits the streets, they have to go to taxi school. Maybe check it out one day, another episode. And we focus more on customer service and kind of teaching that the better service you provide, the better tip you're going to get. So helping the drivers to see it's in their interest to provide good service.
What about the credit card machines? I have had. There's a lot more resistance when they first came in to be able to. I find that it's a convenience.
Yeah.
It suggests to me a tip that might be more than I had historically been thinking of paying, but I still have drivers complain to me that it costs them too much money for that it's hurting them. Are they right?
It's funny. So the credit cards first went in 2009. Now, of course, every taxi has it and has for a few years now. Passenger use has just gone up. It's a fascinating, or it's an interesting graph because it's steady. Every month, the number of people who use credit card rather than cash goes up. And I think drivers have seen that it does work in their favor. Ultimately, two things. First of all, it makes the service a little more accessible. Even when the economy, took a nosedive 2009, beginning of 2010, taxi ridership kept steady. partly, I think, due to the credit cards. And also tips do seem to be larger. You know, it's true, the default tips that are in the, if you want to, every passenger can enter your own tip, but the suggested default tips are a little on the high side. It's interesting. I figured everybody uses those default tips. I do. I'm too lazy, rushed, whatever. I'll just press the button. But it turns out 4 out of 5 passengers enter their own tip. New Yorkers do not like to be pushed around. And this is the message, is they don't want to be told what to do. They're going to just do it themselves. Even though the average tip is 18%, one of the defaults is 20%. So it's about, you could just pick that. They like to enter their own.
We're going to continue our conversation with Taxi and Limousine Chair, if not czar, David Yassky, when CityWide continues right after this.
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY Leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services. To find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNYLeads. CUNY Leads, to the career I always wanted.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with David Yassky, chair of the Taxi and Limousine Commission. So one of the hallmarks of your tenure at the TLC has been technology innovations. I'm going to talk about a number of them in the second half of the show, but I want to start with what's with the annoying video in the back of the taxi cab. So I'm glad I can pay with a credit card. I don't have to worry about having cash with me. I think the drivers must go bonkers listening to the bongs at the beginning of the announcement. And then as a New Yorker, I instinctively turn off the chatter, but is that really necessary?
Well, it's interesting. As you say, you turn it off, and every passenger can. About half do and half watch. So
or at least they don't turn it off because they don't know.
Leave it on.
They don't know that the button's there.
You know, they do leave it on. It does also help pay for that equipment. There's advertising, as you noticed, if you leave it on, and that's in part subsidizes the installation of the credit card equipment, so you don't have to raise the fare to pay for it, and also allows you to do all kinds of things. So we can do Amber Alerts and public service messages on those screens, help to give passengers information about the new rules in the tax. Now we're doing one, for example, about what we call e-hailing, that you can use a smartphone to get a taxi. But I think the key is you can turn it off. And second, we're trying to get more choice in programming. We introduced a second channel a while ago. In truth, almost nobody turns to that. So they don't know it's there, or they don't think the programming is any more compelling than what's on the original one.
Well, here's what I'd recommend. One, make the off button bigger.
Bigger,
right?
Got it.
And
right.
then maybe, how about at the end when the passenger is paying, you could also have a little survey that come up. Were you satisfied with your ride? Do you think that there's something that needs to be improved? You know,
remarkably, we do have surveys, and in the new you're going to see a new configuration of the screen actually rolling out over the next few weeks, and the survey will be. Now you have to push a button, one of the buttons, and then go to the survey. You'll be able to go to survey directly, and we ask all kinds of things. But there's not a question. It's a rotating series of questions. There's not one about the TV itself, I don't think. We should ask about that and see what people say. So I'm glad I came on the show. By the way, sorry, we mostly use it for to collect information that we can use for policy. So how many are there in the cab? You know, are you from New York? Are you outside? Because we don't have a great picture of the passenger population. We use it for that. We usually get passenger feedback. Was this cab clean? How did you feel about the quality of the driving? Right. But for the next few weeks, we're just having some fun with it, or giving the passengers, letting them have some fun with it. It's a taxi trivia quiz that you can take. I think it started yesterday or the day before. Anyway, when this airs, it'll already have been on for a few days, and it'll be for the next few weeks.
What is e-hail? What's it intended to accomplish? Why is there controversy about it? And what's the future of it?
Yeah, I love this is a great issue because so what is it? What's the idea? The idea is somebody could use a smartphone to hail a cab. Passenger has a smartphone. If they want, they download an app that is a taxi hailing app. They hit the app. They hit, and I know that you have always been a real early adopter of a lot of personal information technology and gadgets. Hit the app. I want a cab. You know, it's GPS enabled, so it knows where you are. The app company, because we're not doing this as the government, private enterprise, if they have to sign up drivers who want to use it, it pings the nearest driver, says, you know, passengers on 34th Street, 5th Avenue. The driver wants it, they say accept. Then the passenger on their screen gets a message, cab A739 is coming to get you. Be there in approximately 6 minutes.
It's not like a swarm where every cab around
they ping a particular one and it tells you what number is yours. Now, we'll see if that's useful. I mean, in other cities, it's proved transformationally useful to passengers, but other cities are different from New York in that there's not the density of cabs on the street or the density of passengers looking for cabs. It may be that you're just as happy the old-fashioned stick your hand in the air, and that gets you a cab just as fast. It may be that there are times and places that this is useful. So,
like I could be in the lobby of my building waiting for the cab to show up rather than standing on the street waving at them.
When, you know, it's raining, so I'm going to stand inside. It could be that it's never going to be that useful on 34th Street, 5th Avenue, but on 108th Street in Amsterdam, it'll help you find a cab.
But it presumes, first of all, that I can afford a smartphone. So it's a disadvantage. I mean, obviously, cab riders tend to be more affluent than people who don't have that option, but there's a separation there. But also, haven't some critics suggested that this will just be an excuse for cab drivers to bypass customers based on race or location, and then say, oh, well, I was responding to an e-hail call?
So in terms of the, you know, some have smartphones, some don't, it's definitely the case that to the extent that this becomes a useful way to get a taxi, it means that somebody with a smartphone is able to do it. You know, half of public assistance recipients, for example, have smartphones. I don't know what that says about how widespread smartphones are. I think the reality is, like cell phones, pretty soon it's everyone's going to have one. Truth tell, look, I don't have an iPhone or an Android. I have an old-fashioned BlackBerry that doesn't have apps for this because they don't make apps for BlackBerries. But soon enough. In terms of that kind of discrimination you're talking about, which by the way is still a problem, and we have TLC inspectors every day that are out there doing tester hails. Although the best way, and I'm glad you give me the opportunity, if you flag down a taxi and you say, I'm going to Brooklyn, and they drive away, please, I'm not talking to you so much as you, the viewers, please call 311 and tell us about, that's the best way we're going to stop it. Part of the reason we talked before about better service, I think, is we've revamped our customer complaint operation completely. So now if a customer complains about a particular cab, the driver will hear about it and will probably get a penalty if what they've done is rise to that level. Anyway.
Because most New Yorkers train their children not to say where you're going until you're already in.
Well, and
which is okay if you're white, but not necessarily if you're a person of color.
If you hail by smartphone, the driver doesn't know where you're going because it only tells you this is part of our rules for the service. Can't tell that you don't put in a destination, you only put in where you are. Or don't even put in, the smartphone knows where you are. And the driver doesn't know if you're African American, if you're European American, Asian American, doesn't know what you look like, just knows you're there. If driver accepts that hail, yes, 34th and 5th, I'll pick up, and then they don't take that person because they don't like what the person looks like, we're going to be much better able to get that driver than we are today.
And you would also know if I complained that the driver wouldn't pick me up, and their defense was that they were on an e-hail call, you would know whether that was true or not.
Absolutely. I was going to get to that, but you beat me to it.
Right. So that's tied up in court also?
It's tied up for, I think, I don't think that'll be that will drag out terribly long. You know,
But this time
is
it's
an
the livery
industry.
guys.
This time it's
so for the livery guys that you were going to give
help.
street hail privileges,
Yes.
who were happy with you, and it was the yellow cabs that were. Now it's the livery guys that think that you're destroying their franchise.
What can I tell you? You know, since our goal is serving the public rather than a sector of the industry, sometimes one sector doesn't like it, sometimes the other sector. The livery folks, the car service companies, Dollar Cars, they went to court. They thought it's going to take biz from them. By the way, I think they're just wrong about that. When you make a service more convenient for people, you bring in customers, you expand the pie. That's what I think is going to happen here. At any rate, they did go into court. They got a temporary restraining order of just a few weeks for the court to hear it. I'm very confident that when the court hears the case, we'll win.
So there's got to be something that's not controversial. How about a taxi that's comfortable, it's environmentally sound? You might even call it the taxi of the future. Nobody could be against that, right?
You would think. And yet, well, I'll tell you what, once it hits the streets, like a lot of things, when people see it in the flesh, nobody's going to be against it. The fleet owners are not crazy about that one either, because they think it's going to cost them an extra $1,000 or $2,000 per car. Again, remember, the medallions trade for $1.2 million. So even if it was true, an extra $1,000 or $2,000 every 4 years that they buy a car, not...
But it's not just them. Advocates for the disabled say, well, how come they aren't all handicap accessible?
Now that is a real issue. But just on the car itself, you know, we did something, and I think this is part of what has made Mayor Bloomberg such, in my view, a historically successful mayor, is he's willing to do something different than the way it was done before. Never did it this way. He said, we're going to partner with an auto company so you can tell their design and engineering team, here is what passengers care about. Now design the car to deal with that. So people think it's too hard to step up into the car. This has a retractable step. They don't like the hump in the middle, this flat floor, not enough leg room. They moved the rear seat back. The partition is not crash tested. That's a real safety problem today. This will be the first ever taxi crash tested with the partition. So for passengers, it's a material improvement in service. The issue of transporting people in wheelchairs, this has been, I think, a place where the city government, honestly, has failed over a period of time. The taxi fleet simply was not accessible to people in wheelchairs, zero 10 years ago. The first step was putting some wheelchair accessible cars on the street. There's now, it's a small number, 230 out of those 13,000. Just putting them on the street wasn't good enough. You got to get them to the people who need them. So 6 months ago, we enabled 311, call 311, to take calls from people, somebody in a wheelchair, say, I need a wheelchair accessible cab. And then that cab is sent, like this e-hailing, is sent to go pick the passenger up. It's worked really well. So far, we've served more people in 6 months than a 2-year pilot version did in the whole 2 years. The current wait time for those cabs is about 14 minutes. So that's a lot more than if you've got your hand in the air. It's not forever, but it's still too much. All 2,000, we talked before about how we're going to get 2,000 new cabs. Every one of those is going to be wheelchair accessible. So by the time we've got those all deployed, the wait time from the 311 service will be about 3 to 5 minutes.
And maybe if I'm an eligible passenger, I'll be able to push a button on my smartphone to signal that I need an accessible cab.
It's funny, even this program now, it's available by a smartphone app, and about 20%, 1 out of 5 of the wheelchair users who are using this program use it by the smartphone app, which is, to me, is a much higher user rate for that, faster than I would have expected.
My thanks to Commissioner David Yassky, Chair of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us in this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at cuny.tv.